Hello and welcome to Daily Reflection with Aneel Aranha. Today is the 9th of September 2019. We're going to reflect on Luke 6:6-11. On another Sabbath, Jesus entered the synagogue and taught, and there was a man there whose right hand was withered. The scribes and the Pharisees watched him to see whether he would cure on the Sabbath, so that they might find an accusation against him. Even though he knew what they were thinking, he said to the man who had the withered hand, "Come and stand here." The man got up and stood there. Then Jesus said to them, "I ask you, is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save life or to destroy it?" After looking around at all of them, he said to him, "Stretch out your hand." He did so, and his hand was restored. But they were filled with fury and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus. The Gospel of the Lord. Disobedience has consequences. Disobeying our parents when growing up can result in punishment. Ditto for disobeying our teachers in school or college. In the work environment, disobeying our bosses can get us terminated from our jobs. In the army, the consequence of disobedience usually is a court-martial. Disobeying the wishes of a dictator can result in death. And we all know the consequences of disobeying God. Adam and Eve did that, and all of humankind paid the penalty. Obedience to authority is needed and often a good thing. Without obedience, there would be anarchy. Christians have been advised since the early days of the church to be obedient to authority. In his letter to the Romans, Paul states clearly, "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God." This would obviously mean that we are to be obedient to religious authorities as well. In today's passage, we find that Jesus is disobedient to the religious authorities. And it is not the only time he has done this. We find another instance when he allowed his disciples to pluck corn from the fields and then explained why this was okay to the outraged Pharisees. We reflected upon this a couple of days ago. Then we find Peter and the apostles also disobeying the direct orders of the Sanhedrin not to talk about Jesus. So when is it okay to disobey orders from those in civil authority? We get a clue from Peter and the other apostles' response to the Sanhedrin. We must obey God rather than human beings, they said. When a government's commands conflict with God's commands, we must follow God. This might very well result in consequences, but we should be prepared to accept that. The apostles were flogged for their disobedience. Daniel, who is another example of disobedience, was thrown into a den of hungry lions. And when is it okay to disobey those in religious authority? When they are observably wrong. Scripture advises obedience in many circumstances, but unjust or irrational obedience is never required or demanded. But even when leaders demand obedience to something that is unjust or irrational, discernment and discretion is required. Seeking God's counsel in such a situation is essential to determine our response, as well as seeking the counsel of church elders. After all, we are not as wise as Jesus. The rule of thumb is generally be obedient. God bless you.